Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello and welcome to episode 40 of India Rising Strategic Affairs Conversations with Mohal and Kishor. For a change today, we both are in front of the camera and we are going to use that as an opportunity to explain a lot more things than we generally do in our podcast. Thank you for joining us today, as always. And today we're going to talk about the latest skirmish that we have had at the line of actual control between India and China in the state of Arunachal Pradesh near Tawang. Now, as we all know, there were unconfirmed reports claiming that the PLA soldiers had transgressed across the LAC, had tried to do that, and the Indian soldiers had to resort to fist fights and other means of physical dimension where they had to confrontation where they had to push them back, and thus especially when the Chinese had actually thought that they were able to outnumber the Indian soldiers, but then we all got to know that the Indians were successful in pushing them back to their side of the LAC. So that was the unconfirmed reports that we had got. And then when news started trickling in, when further information started trickling in, we got to know that this had actually happened on the 9th of December. The buildup had started then. However, we all now know that this buildup had actually started a little earlier, around the last week of November. And since that had happened, the Indian army had kind of started preparing, knowing very well that the Chinese were up to something. And as part of that, the Indians were able to bring in reinforcements without the Chinese getting to know of that. And eventually on the day of 9th of December, when the Chinese soldiers, using the fog as cover, started moving closer and closer to the LAC, that was when they thought that they would have 6-1 superiority, wherein they were 300 in number, and they thought that they would easily be able to outnumber and outmaneuver the 50-odd Indian troops. But unbeknownst to them, the Indians had already gotten their reinforcements, and with the help of that, they were able to confront the battalion-sized force of the PLA, who wanted to surround the region called Thangla. Now, the Indian Army troops at Thangla, they managed to form some kind of a human chain, and with this kind of a method, they were able to deter the large PLA. Now, what ensued was a lot of pushing, pulling, with soldiers from both sides kind of pushing each other. Verbal abuse, physical abuse ensued, and eventually the Chinese had to bring in some kind of reinforcement, wherein the soldiers who came in from the rear, they came in with tasers, monkey gloves, spiked clubs. I mean, we know this as their operating procedure when we got to know about the Galwan incident as well, wherein they had come in with similar kind of weapons. So this was no surprise for the Indian Army, and they were equally adept and equally prepared for this kind of an eventuality. But then amidst all this confusion, the Indian soldiers were actually able to push the Chinese soldiers back onto their side of LAC. Now, what ensued thereafter was a quick, uh, what ensued thereafter was a quick de-escalation by the commanding officers at the local level, and with that, I think whatever skirmish had happened was now, at least for the time being, peacefully settled, and that was the end of the skirmish as such. But then when this happened, everybody were kind of unsure about where did it actually happen, how did it happen, how close was it to the LAC, was it on our side of the LAC or on the other side, what do the Chinese think, and what were the Chinese media claiming about. So we had a lot of questions. So Mohal, if you can kind of unearth all these, probably by kind of explaining to us the topography, the physical location. I think we can take that conversation further from there. Mohal?
Yeah, so I'm going to like share the Google Earth view of where the standoff occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope you can see the screen. So this is basically the Indian map with the, I mean, this is like where you call is where is Arunachal Pradesh. So if you see, as I zoom in, this is the western part of Arunachal Pradesh that abuts Sikkim to the west and has Tibet to the north. So this was in the Tawang sector. I mean, Tawang is one of the
Right.
most prominent cities in Arunachal Pradesh. It's the it has a, I think, the second largest Buddhist monastery in the world, only smaller than Lhasa. And this is also where I think the sixth Dalai Lama or the eighth Dalai Lama, I
Eighth,
forget, like was from.
eighth Dalai Lama Rinpoche. Yeah,
Yeah, and then this pass, like, I mean, if you can see my, you can see my mouse, right?
I can. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was the path through which when the current Dalai Lama he fled Tibet,
Mm-hmm.
this was the route he took and he came to Tawang. So this is like the and this is also the famous for the 1962 war where the Indian soldiers were, for lack of better term, massacred near the Thagla Ridge, just north of the Bumla Pass. I mean, west to the Bumla Pass, but like anyways. So getting to where the current incident has occurred. So it has occurred near the Thangla post. So if you see the Thangla post, it is a post out here at around, I would say, sorry, this is a post you can see on Google Earth. It's, I would say the elevation is around 15,000 feet. Now the red line is like, I mean, it's a, bear with me, it's like an approximation of where Google Earth thinks is the LAC. The Indian interpretations or the Chinese interpretations could very well vary. So this is a Thangla post. So this is an Indian Army post. Now the incident, nobody has provided definitive Google Earth coordinates. It's all rumored to be somewhere near the Thangla post or in the vicinity of this post, where at an altitude of 17,000 feet, that's what the news reports keep on saying, 17,000 feet.
Right. Yeah.
So interestingly, there is a Chinese post or model village which is just to the north of the Thangla post. I would say like probably it might be, I mean, not more than a few kilometers. So this is the Chinese post in the valley, which is opposite our Thangla post. So Indians are at a higher, greater altitude, which is always of higher, great significance in this mountain terrain.
Yeah. They
So
have the height advantage. Yeah.
yeah, so this is the topography. Now, if you look to the west, I mean, this is the 108 holy waterfalls. I forget what was the name, Kishore. The
Uh, yeah. Chumigyatse.
Yeah, Chumigatse holy waterfall. Now, this has been in an area that India has uh, occupied since I think the 1987 Sumdarangchu,
Mm-hmm.
and this has like irked China also to no end. I mean, this is supposed to be like of a high reverence to the Buddhists, and Chinese always had an eye for this area. But anyways, coming back to the point, this area is a elevation which is like probably 13-14,000 feet. And one last point on this waterfalls, I think last year the Arunachal Pradesh chief minister yeah, had inaugurated a gompa in this area, which also didn't sit well with the Chinese.
Right.
So this is basically the plateau which is to the west of this area, which is like, I mean, it's under Chinese control, assuming this is the LAC and the Indians would be on the higher elevation here. But anyways, back to the point. So this Thangla post is at like 15,000 feet, and then the topography going to the west of it is like at a lower elevation. So the assumption is if you go towards the east, like a possible point of intrusion would be here, which is at around 17, just under 16,944 feet. Now again, this is my assumption, there is no definitive point. I mean, there are also, as you see the red line along the post, there are several other points, but they are extending all the way to 18,500 feet high, and it goes higher and higher. So there could have been a possible intrusion in these areas, but if I had to take a guess, this would be the most possible because there is a saddle. So in these mountains, like usually, like nobody wants to stay on the top because they are like windswept regions
Yep.
and
Yep.
they're very hard to sustain. So a saddle is basically a dip between two peaks where you can enter or exit and have some kind of shelter. I
Protection.
would say
Yeah.
like shelter, but from the elements. So this is the intrusion point. What we suspect is that here is where the maybe there were like folks who were deployed from the Thangla post out up here, and maybe there was some fisticuffs and pushing and shoving, and the Chinese could have been reinforced from this Chinese post or model village just to the north of here. So let me like now look at it from a different angle. So if I rotate this map, like why this point, what is the significance of this point? So if you look at this area, if you get entrenched into this area, the Chinese, if they could get entrenched into this area, what you could do is, just bear with me. Uh, if you see from this point, looking at Google Earth, sorry, uh, yeah. So see, I got it. So if you see up here, yeah. Oops, sorry. So from this point, if you could see these roads, this is the visible point. This is the road which leads from Tawang South to the Sela Pass. Now the Sela Pass is like, I mean, today it is not an all-weather road. I mean, India is trying, as part of the border infrastructure upgrade, they are trying to upgrade to an all-weather channel, which sorry, tunnel, which is going to be open like soon. But anyways, this is, if this was the possible intrusion point, they could have an eye on the road leading up to Tawang, so they could monitor the Indian activities uh, going down, and also like keep an eye out on if there is any military movement. The other significance of this location is that it also has this, if you see these Indian roads leading up to the post up in Thangla post. So they could also have an eye out on these roads leading up to, so they could see movement up to the Thangla post, they could see Sila tunnel. And in the, I mean, I'm thinking of the worst case scenario, which shouldn't happen all the time. But I mean, if they could also enter here, they could come down the slope and try to cut out the Thangla post from the rear. So if they
Mm.
commanded these heights, obviously we would be facing them off until they vacated. But in like the worst case scenario, in theory, you could like create trouble for the Thangla post, or you could cut off, like, that part of the area. And like, I mean, if you look at it, there's no other point like our saddle in the boundary if you go to the east. So this would be the one of the most favorable positions. Also, like, I mean, to a certain extent you can see the Mago Valley. So this is the
Mm.
valley in the Mago Valley, so you could also have observation into this valley. So you could have a like a vantage point where you could have a good observation. I mean, technically you could even, someone said, like, you could put in a radar, or you could have a permanent outpost. But I mean, basically you are commanding the heights in this area.
Totally agree. So
So
in a way, this looks like the Chinese had a really well thought plan for them to actually try to capture this height, and that way not only have an upper hand as compared to the Thangla post, but more importantly, like you said, try to have a view on the road leading up to Tawang,
yeah,
and
yeah,
also try to understand the movements of the Indian Army leading up to and from these
yeah.
posts. Yeah,
Yeah, so this is the Tawang Road. So this is the area where they could have, and I mean, I didn't mark it on the map, but like somewhere here should be the Sela Tunnel. So this is like the basically the connectivity to Tawang. So
hmm,
they could have an, I mean, they're not going to come down all the way. I mean, obviously we're going to we're going to like block them before that, but technically they could have a view directly into
right.
the
Yes.
Sela Tunnel, Tawang Road.
Agree, agree. So that is where things seem to have happened. But while all these information were trickling in, there were some video evidences that people thought were actually recordings of the December 9 incident. But then very quickly, people got to know that this was actually an incident that happened in the October of last year, right? That was what people
Yeah, I mean, in
clarified.
mid-December, I mean, I know, like even I got for some a couple of these forwards on WhatsApp, and I was like, I mean, in mid-December at 17,000 feet,
Exactly. Yeah.
if there is
No,
like lush green vegetation, then there's something wrong.
but-
I mean, either we have massive global warming, or this is just being this was too good to be true. And the terrain also, if you look at it, it didn't match
yeah.
what it was probably some others. It was Arunachal Pradesh for sure, but it was probably, or maybe Sikkim also, but it was some other sector.
Probably,
uh
yeah. It could have been anywhere else, but definitely not at the height of 17,000 feet. I mean,
yeah,
if it was happening at this point, but then the other point that came out with that kind of a video evidence was that this was not a one-off incident. This was not something that happened only this time around, but we got to know that this area being heavily contested by both and also acknowledged by both of them as some kind of territory that needs clear demarcation. There were enough patrols that would happen by both the armies, which would lead to quite a bit of unruly behavior, wherein both the patrolling parties would end up fighting with each other. So
yeah, but see
recent
earlier.
example happening, the recent example being in October of last year. Yeah, Mohal.
Yeah, I think, but see, like the difference about this event was that they came well prepared with a lot of this. I mean, as if the reports are to be believed, like with these weapons, and usually in the earlier, what used to happen is they used to patrol to their claim line, and when Indians used to object, they used to go back. This time, like they came prepared for a fight, and they wanted to dislodge India from that position. So there has been a change in the behavior. I mean, if I was looking at this, listening to this interview on. I believe like Strat News Global by Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, who was a brigadier in this Tawang area. Like, and he said, like even in the during 99 Kargil war, there were patrols in coming up to their claim line in this area, and even in 2006 and 7. But like most of the times they went back peacefully, and there wasn't this fisticuffs or stone throwing or
Right, right.
like hand to hand fighting which has occurred. So this is like kind of concerning, and I mean this is like something even in our earlier podcast, like we had said, like with more patrolling and more aggressive Chinese behavior, there are bound to be more of these skirmishes all across the LAC. I mean, it's just like it's first time in the Arunachal sector the fisticuffs have happened.
Mm, mm,
I mean, we did have them in Sikkim with around the Doklam area.
mm.
No, sorry, not the Doklam, the
Uh,
North Sikkim. There was some pushing and shouting, like I think in 2020, late 2020.
And anyway, similar things happened in Galwan as well.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Okay, so yeah, the point that we established now of the Chinese wanting to alter the LAC by by physically claiming that area. I mean, our own Raksha Mantri, Rajnath Singh himself, addressed the parliament and gave a statement. Now, in that, he very clearly mentioned, and I quote an English translation of what he mentioned: the PLA troops tried to transgress the LAC in the Yangtze area of Tawang sector and unilaterally changed the status quo, which was quite obvious of what their intentions were. Their intentions were much more than mere patrolling, exactly what you were mentioning, Mohan. Now, as part of that statement, Rajnath Singh also clarified and informed that our troops contested the Chinese attempt in a firm and resolute manner, and the ensuing face-off led to a physical scuffle. And our Indian Army bravely prevented the PLA from transgressing and all that. Now, luckily, he also said that due to timely intervention of Indian military commanders, PLA soldiers went back to their locations. As a follow up of the incident, the local commander in the area held a flag meeting with his counterpart on 11th December, 2 days later, to discuss the issue in accordance with established mechanisms. The Chinese side was asked to refrain from such actions and maintain peace and tranquility along the border. Unquote. So, quite clearly, the way Raksha Mantri has explained on the floor of the House, it looks like this particular skirmish has ended for the time being, but any intelligence analyst would bet his last rupee or last dollar to say that this would not be the last, that the Chinese would want to alter the LAC physically on the site there. So I think everybody understands that whatever would happen, there are chances that this can repeat anytime soon. Now, generally, people thought that such things would happen during the summer when the weather is far more hospitable. This was this is kind of unusual or rare to see such a thing happening during the onset of winter. And once this happens, it is almost a situation where all bets are off. Now everybody would be forced to continue with their patrolling even during the harshest of winter, and even when winter turns into spring and snow starts melting. I mean, there are even bigger chances of the troops, the PLA troops, actually increasing their own patrolling and trying to alter the LAC based on what their assumptions or what their understanding is. So I think this is the opening of the Pandora's box. I mean, whatever happens from now on would be at a totally different dimension from compared to what was happening until now, and similar to the situation that we see at the Siachen Glacier, where even during winter or even during the harshest inclement weather, Indians maintain the Siachen region and also continue with their patrolling. I think the Indians will have to continue with that even along the LAC. I think this is, I mean, we have spoken about it a number of times during our multiple podcast episodes. Whenever we have
Yeah.
spoken about the India-China skirmishes along the LAC, but I mean, we cannot emphasize enough on what needs to be done at the LAC, and happy that Indian Army is up to the situation. They are handling it quite well. Mohal.
Yeah, I mean, unlike like past events, like India has not been caught unaware. I
Yeah,
mean, as you
right.
said that we called up I mean, the QRT or the quick response team came, and they were able to block a much larger, the 50 folks, 50 soldiers were able to block a supposedly size of 300 soldiers
300.
with reinforcement corps. So this was one of the good situations where, I mean, where we fortunate situation that we were able to block it and like nip it in the bud before like more damage, because if let's say the post was lost, then it would have created a lot of heartburn in India and also soul searching as to what I think like Indian army is vigilant at the border,
Mm,
but like there, I mean, we have like a what, 3,500, almost 3,500 kilometer LAC. So it is like very easily for China to transgress in an area where possibly India is not patrolling or not has. I mean, there are a lot of methods of surveillance. I mean, many of them classified like to see for the Indians to keep an eye out, especially on the disputed sections of the border. But I mean, it's physically impossible to man every inch of the border. But I mean, and then as patrolling steps up in uh, all across the LAC. I mean, and then the worrying part is also it's happening in the winter.
Hmm.
There'll be have to be. I mean, the more patrolling, the more chances of face off, right? Because you could have two people in the same position at the same time, and then you could have the face off. Like if someone patrols and goes back, then technically, I mean, when the other army came, like there was nobody to object to, and so
Hmm.
there was not an issue. But I mean, yeah, this does create, I think in the Ladakh area at least, like we have these buffer zones created in, like you name PP point, PP 15, PP 16, PP 17. PP 15 is basically Galwan, 16 and 17 are in the Kungran Valley near hot springs, and also in the Pangongso area. So there is less chance of issue because a so-called buffer zone where nobody has agreed to patrol. Now the question is for how long nobody's agreed to patrol is an open-ended question. So I mean, minus Depsang, where the issue is still ongoing of where Chinese refuse to like go back. Uh, so there's less chance of an issue occurring in like the Ladakh area, but now it opens up to the central, it is in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh central sector or the eastern sector, which is like basically Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. I mean, Sikkim technically it's an international boundary because China had accepted it as part of
Hmm.
the deal in the early 2000s, where we accepted Tibet was a part of China and
Yeah.
Sikkim was a part of India. So technically, but I mean, you never know like what the events in October 2020 showed that in northern Sikkim there was standoff or skirmishes.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think Arunachal is obviously many had pointed out is a place to look out for.
Hmm.
I mean, and I think we also can reiterate this. I mean, as we had said in episode 27 after Galwan, that I think this was like I forget like what was that incident in 1959, which just put us on an unavoidable path to a larger military skirmish in the future. So, I mean, there were like luckily no shots have been fired. I mean, technically the Chinese when retreating, they fired some shots in the air to as a warning shots. But like, yeah, I mean, luckily the use of guns has not been used. I mean, in
Hmm.
Kailash, we did fire some shots when the Chinese tried to run over our positions. So they were like basically warning shots, which even like ex chief of army staff, uh, uh, I can't, sorry, I can't recall his name now, Rane. Like he confirmed in a recent interview with ANI, but uh, I mean, this is a worrying sign that there are more and more skirmishes. I mean, the
Hmm.
good part is that the border infrastructure development has been pushed more and more because the problem is like the Chinese, if today they could come in 300, like they have better access and better roads. So tomorrow, let's say if you bring in 1,000, can the India, even if you have a quick response team, can you still block them or not? So I think it's just going to have an, I mean, we had in the Cold War, we used to have something called the arms race where you used to build more missiles, more nuclear bombs and more fighter jets by the other side. I think in on the LAC what we have is basically an arms race of infrastructure development. I mean, China's were ahead, India is catching up. So China is not going to sit idle. They're going to build everything on their side
Indeed.
of the LAC to try to catch up with our side, while India is also trying to catch up. So it's an arms race of who can build more
Hmm.
infrastructure to push more troops. And also something else we had put in our, I think episode 26 or something like before the Galwan clash, that the LOCization of LAC is happen
Hmm.
now. Now, if this thing happens, I mean, if Chinese are trying to find new intrusion points or to into like probably we have to man the border in like all the strategic or vulnerable locations. I mean, a lot of the LAC is like high peaks which probably nobody's going to cross, but like important saddles, important valleys, important passes, they all will have to be manned, like, or at least some kind of electronic surveillance will have to be enforced that if
Yeah.
Chinese try to come in. I mean, also remember that many of these areas are not pretty inaccessible. Even in Arunachal Pradesh, it takes few days, sometimes to reach to this position. So if there was a if Chinese were going to use better roads, and if they want to ingress within a matter of hours, India to have a response, it will take much longer. So that's why the infrastructure development is on a high pace, where we want to make sure that in case something happens at a quick pace, India has the infrastructure to deploy its own troops at a larger point. But coming back to the larger point, I mean, more troops will have to be put on the border all across the LAC.
Right.
Kishore.
Yeah. Very quickly before we wind up, we are running short of time. Okay. So at a strategic level, at a diplomatic level, I think this will only worsen the situation between India and China at the top echelons. Modi was already avoiding Xi Jinping and not wanting to have a good conversation with him, even during the SEO summit. And then this time around at the G20, they hardly had any meaningful conversation. Now that India is going to be the president of the next G20 summit, I really doubt if India would really extend a warm welcome to the Chinese president. I think that will be spoken about extensively in the next 10, 11 months. And also I think India, being the host, will have to be large-hearted to invite Xi Jinping, obviously. But then, at the same time, India will also try to express their displeasure to China, telling, "Hey, you know what? This is our red line, and we don't want you to cross our red lines. And therefore, you are indeed welcome to come over to our G20 summit, but at the same time also keep in mind that we will have all G20 related events in any part of Indian mainland,
Yeah, I think we have it in.
wh-
I think
uh,
they are stated to us some events in Arunachal and Ladakh, which
and
China won't take
Ladakh.
it lightly.
Exactly, yeah.
And I don't
So
know. I mean, some people have been speculating that they could do more incursions just to show India in a bad light just ahead of the G20.
precisely, precisely. So I think there will be that kind of a tit for tat situation where now that India has announced that some of the events can be held in Ladakh and in Arunachal, China will also want to show who is the boss at the LAC. So I think we will continue to hear all these things leading up to the G20 summit in Delhi in late 2023. Mohal, you want to quickly add any points there?
No, I mean, it will probably like be a busy summer. I mean, I don't know how bad things could get in the winter, but also in the summer. Uh, I mean, especially with the G20 and India putting events out there in Ladakh and Arunachal, just
Right.
means that probably more incursions and China trying to, uh, I mean, as you rightly said, like show who is the boss and create more trouble and just put India in a poor light. So, plus, I
Mm.
mean, the Chinese internal situation with COVID and
Yeah.
stuff is not getting any better. So, who knows? I mean, they might try to create some mischief to divert their people's attention with some nationalistic fervor, you know.
Probably,
Kishore?
yes. Yeah, yeah. That is also something that people are expecting to happen. Okay. So, anything else to add, Mohal, before we wind up?
No, I mean, we'll have to, I mean, keep an eye out on these events with on the LSC with keen eye over the next few months, and
Mm.
we can only hope for the best and pray that it doesn't descend into any untoward event like Nathula type of clashes in 1967, you know.
Right, right. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our episode today, dear listeners. Now, if you want us to cover any particular topic, do let us know. You can suggest them to us. But then just remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. Now, this time around, we had our cameras on. We were in front of the camera. We wanted to showcase the visual. We wanted to use visual aid as well to drive home the point. Do let us know if this is a medium that you would want us to continue with, and we would be eager to listen from you. Now, until the next time, this is Mohal and Kishore signing off.